My first guest today is Melanie Franklin. Melanie has been leading program, project and change initiatives for over 2 decades, with a client base spread across the US, Europe and the Middle East. She is a prolific contributor to the opus of change management and is considered a global thought leader. She has written books on change and agility, contributed to several other publications, and published numerous articles on the relationship between change management and several other disciplines. A talented communicator and has a reputation for delivering complex information with humor and passion. Her musing on LinkedIn are both educational, practical, and funny. She's a founder of the Capability for Change, an online platform for developing practical skills and capabilities for helping organizations achieve change and transformation. She's delivering on her own personal North Star, which is to help people find answers for how to make change happen in their organization, while reducing personal stress and coping with constant high volumes of change. She also finds time to rescue dogs and give them a better life. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you.
My second guest is Andrew Craddock. If the age of Agile can be said to have started with the publication of the Agile Manifesto in February 2001, Andrew has been deeply involved in promoting and expanding the concept of Agile ever since. Trained and assessed by the co-creator of Scrum, Ken Schwarber, he was one of the first Scrum Masters in the UK. He is the co-author for the internationally recognized Agile PM framework for Agile Project Management, which is probably the global standard. He's been an enthusiastic member of the leadership team of the Agile Business Consortium for most of the last 20 years, and at one time was the consortium's chair. His professional passion is to take Agile beyond its roots in IT into the wider context of business agility. Welcome, Andrew. So, Melanie and Andrew, you both had extensive experience in delivering projects, training people in project management, and you can remember a time before we had so many Agile approaches to choose from, a long time ago mainly. But firstly, Melanie, if you were advising an organization with no internal capability regarding Agile project management, what advice would you give them regarding an approach? And why do you think people who are involved in projects should consider taking an Agile certification?
I think we have to widen it out to look at any approach to Agile is a cultural change. And so I think a good starting point is to look across different Agile methodologies and think about the principles. What's really happening with Agile? When I wrote the Agile Change Handbook, I put in 5 core concepts, like focusing on the business need, making sure that we had an evolving solution, not a fixed solution up front that we couldn't vary from. So I think there are elements of an Agile way of working that actually challenge people. It's much harder to be abandoning your perfectionism, that idea of I'll do a little bit and see how it's reacted to, and then I'll build on that. It's really tough. So it is a way of working, it's a way of behaving, it's a way of prioritizing your work. I think for that cultural change to happen, what we need is people to look at the core concepts and think about how they fit into their wider culture. I have a lot of clients around the world who want a more agile culture. They want a more innovative culture, which is another way often of saying that they want greater agility. So I think it's all about making sure that it's baked into how people behave. And I think that then comes down to it's worth getting certified, because if you take a course, you have the benefit of feeling I've had that achievement, but you've also got the confidence from you've been trained, you know what you're talking about. That certification builds confidence not only in yourself, but it also builds credibility for other people. Why should I listen to you? What do you know about Agile? Well, when you know that you've got a badge of honor, then you can speak more freely and you can think during the courses that you take, how am I going to make this work in practice? So I think it's that wider picture of I need to behave in an Agile way and I need to take other people with me. It's worth investing in your own understanding first. It's the basic principle, isn't it, of leadership. Understand before you try and make other people understand you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, what would you add to what Melanie has said based on your experience of delivering projects and training people in project management?
So I think there are a couple of really good points to build out there from my perspective, and I think a lot of what Mel just described was really about being agile as much as doing agile. And I think quite often it's sensible to follow a framework in order to understand how agility works, but ultimately your goal, certainly in terms of a sort of business context, is to become agile so that your organization can benefit from that agility that comes from within people. And I think that really plays back into the having approaches like Agile PM, having approaches that deal with change and so on, that have the mechanisms of agility built into those. Um, I think some consistency from, for example, one project to another makes a lot of sense. And the other thing in terms of understanding change is about understanding the value that change can bring. And going back to my first experiences with agility, as we now call it, was actually back in 1997. That time I was a project manager working at British Airways, and we had come to the understanding that our approaches we were using for our projects just didn't work anymore. They all projects overran in terms of time, overran in terms of budget, and failed to satisfy the needs of the customer that they were being created for. Starting to bring key concepts like engaging your customer in the development process, using concepts like iteration, using concepts like on-time delivery, achieved through flexing the scope of what is delivered, really starts to help to do that. And what from a number of pilots that were run, British Airways found they were getting productivity uplift of somewhere between 25 and 100%, depending on the size and scale of a project. As soon as you start seeing that sort of value, people start getting very interested and thinking, hang on, this must be the right way to go. So I think understanding where you are now, and perhaps even though it's unpalatable for many, benchmarking where you are now, which is what British Airways had the courage to do back then, demonstrated that really significant improvement in performance. So understanding where you are, using a consistent approach to experiment and demonstrate what works and what doesn't, is key. And in terms of the certifications and that sort of thing, um, I've worked with many corporates like Mel has, and there are you see the bad behaviours, the bad practices that exist. I tell you what, if we just put a few posters on the wall that talk about our culture will become what it says on the poster on the wall. Don't think so. And similarly, if it's a case of, guys, we're going to use this new agile approach to doing things, read this paper or watch this 20-minute video, and then we're all good. That sort of thing doesn't work either. You need that opportunity that Mel described of actually engaging your brain with this stuff, the opportunity to learn and discuss and really get it clear in your own mind what it is you need to do in order to achieve agility. And I think the certification process can help with that.
Andrew, you made an interesting comment, and that was don't do agile, be agile. So, in your consulting experience, how easy is it for not just individuals, but teams of people to be agile, to become agile?
So for me, that lies in the way, the autonomy that those teams are allowed to have fundamentally. And I guess if it came across as don't do agile, be agile, that wasn't quite right. I think doing agile is a good place to start and part of the journey of becoming agile. But just using an agile framework, following an agile way of working, will only take you so far. Yeah, I've worked with one client who, saw a nice little uplift in their productivity and all of those things, genuinely got benefit from doing Agile, but didn't really make that jump into the sort of cultural change that Mel was talking about. And so they hit a ceiling with what they were able to do. Yeah, and they needed to go through that ceiling into real culture change and real thinking in an agile way in order to achieve that greater objective.
And Melanie, I know you've worked with a lot of large organisations about that whole thing about cultural change. Is there a couple of things that stand out from those who can successfully make the cultural change? Is there sort of some guiding lights for those?
I think it is all about basics from the neuroscience world, really. Ask, don't tell, in that when you get people to describe what Agile means to them and how they are going to work, and that they share that understanding with their colleagues. So constant facilitated conversations about how we're doing this and building on how we're doing this, tailoring it to their own situations, is how you ultimately change the culture, because people are involved in setting out their expectations, their assumptions, and working it out with their colleagues and their peers about what are the new norms effectively. So there's a lot of benefit in going on some of our certified courses. We have Agile PM, we've got Agile Change Agent. We've got a lot of courses that help people all come together with the same language, the same terminology and understanding, but that's always the starting point. You then build on that. It's that articulation of your own interpretation that helps cement it in your own mind, but it also helps others who you're working with understand where you're coming from, what your own assumptions are, how you can work together. Culture is something that we develop collaboratively. I think a lot of our certified courses give people a language to start that conversation and a benchmark, if you like. This is what best practice says. Now we're going to tweak it, we're going to tailor it according to our circumstances. But you can all start from the same base level when you've been on a certified course together. So I think that's one of the big selling points, as well as that idea that people have got that achievement and that collective goal of, we've all studied for this, we've all got this new qualification. And we know from APMG that how excited people are when they say they share their digital badges across social media, and they put it on their email footers when they say, I've got this qualification now. So I think there's a lot of benefit as the certification courses as the basis for all the facilitated collaboration in how we make culture happen.
Talking of certification courses, I mean, you were the person that sort of spearheaded the thinking around bringing together Agile and Change. I think I can remember a conversation with you, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 years ago, where you said, you've been looking at these subjects, these topics, you think there's an opportunity to bring them together. And that's been very, very successful. But what led you to that? What led you to that belief that the combination of Agile and Change was what industry needed?
I think it's been a growing realization. It's actually nearly 10 years, because I published the Agile Change Management Handbook in 2014. And you and I have built the Agile Change Agent certification off the back of the second edition, which came out just a few years ago. The original realization was that if we have developers from an IT perspective working in an agile way, then they are delivering to us tangible change. They're delivering something that then has to be adopted. Now, it's no longer just IT developers. We have an awful lot of consultancies who are putting together target operating models, restructuring organizations, launching new products and services in an agile way. But one thing they all have in common is that they're creating something that then needs to be implemented and adopted. So being able to partner the piecemeal creation of something with the piecemeal adoption of something was absolutely core. We needed that piece around creating new ways of working in an agile way. And that effectively is what the Agile Change courses do. It is about how do we adopt new ways of working when we're getting drip fed what the actual changes are. And I think in the widest sense, it's also about a recognition by organizations all over the world that we need to work in this more piecemeal way, this evolving solution, because we can't wait for a perfect moment when everything's been finished and we're ready to launch, because everything around us is always changing and we need to flex. So we might have a module of a system, we think we've worked out the new processes, the new standards, the new policies, and the new performance metrics, but other changes, other programs are going live around us, and we need to keep tweaking what we're doing. Having an agile change approach enables us to keep making change happen and doing it in that iterative way that reflects the iterative way in which the tangible structural changes of our organization are actually being conceived.
Thank you. Andrew, you've led a number of development teams for the Agile Business Consortium at a time when, Agile was really in the IT area of the business. How did you determine that we needed specific guidance on Agile Project Management and indeed Agile Program Management, and more recently, Agile Project Management for Scrum? What was the thought process within the consortium that says we need to take it out to the wider world?
So I think the thought process almost had two threads. So the first element was we were focusing our original approach, DSDM, the Dynamic Systems Development Method, which was that's what it says on the tin, as an approach to managing projects involving IT. Very importantly, though, right from the very beginning, it wasn't just about building systems. It had elements of understanding and relating to business change in the context of that. So that's the first element, the first strand, if you like. And the second strand really came from the whole sort of issue that we identified, and lots of consultants were identifying the same thing. The issue of agility being contained within IT was just not delivering the value that it had the potential to deliver. So actually engaging the business people more in thinking about business change. So those projects, the drip feed projects that Mel was talking about earlier, those sort of involving people properly in that way, and understanding that perhaps software and systems were just one aspect of that change. You've got all the other enablers, because after all, building a piece of software and sticking it on the shelf does not deliver value. You have to use it and get the most out of it. So that it was that sort of realization, and the issue almost of combination of governance around those sorts of projects, and the trend that really started in the 1980s, that software teams had customers, and putting that, layering that sort of retail context onto it rather than a partnership context was really getting in the way. So this idea that the customer would specify exactly what they want and then lob a specification over the wall to an IT team to build the software, and even if the software was built in perfect accordance with the specification, which it rarely was, even if it was, it wouldn't have met the business need, because you need that collaboration. So that's what led to the big change within the consortium. And when we moved from being the DSDM consortium to being the Agile Business Consortium, was to really start getting into that business space. And then, of course, the whole sort of movement of business agility has grown around the same time, which really takes the use of agile techniques, if you like, into the wider business context. And what was really interesting was the observation that, and this comes from the principles that Mel mentioned earlier. You look at the principles and you think, well, they're just common sense. Well, if they're just common sense, why is it we've been doing things different to common sense? Yeah. So actually breaking that conditioning, that bad conditioning that somehow managed to evolve, is again requires that sort of wider embracing of the business in order to do that, and allowing that to happen again gives businesses the understanding that what they might be doing with IT to satisfy a dynamic business need, they can do with their organization to satisfy a dynamic market need. And I think that's where that sort of journey has gone.
That's quite interesting. I mean, since the beginning of sort of Agile IT has been the concept of the Scrum team. And Melanie, do Scrum teams fit within Agile change initiatives? Is that something that is transferable, or is it a different concept within an Agile change initiative?
I think the most important thing about any kind of agile change is a recognition that any change takes a community. So it can be any development team, if you like, is a part of the change because it's creating the tangible change. So whether it's an IT development or, as I mentioned earlier, it could be any kind of creation of something new from the processes we follow, the products that we have. Those teams need to work alongside the business who will actually have to work differently. And I think often we find people from the change management world sitting in the middle there and trying to liaise between both groups. It's bringing together if you like, the creators of tangible change, the people who are going to behave differently, and those that are going to coordinate that effort, whether they're called a change or transformation manager, whether they're called a program manager. But actually bringing all those parties together, I think, is really important. I think especially as I'm not sure agility is always the term that I see around the world now. Bringing it bang up to date, agility is not necessarily the conversation we have in the boardroom. The request at board level is for innovation. I think the way in which we deliver the demand for innovative cultures and getting new products, new services, and new ways of working up and running is through an agile approach. But I think we have to make sure that we see the word agile or agility next to the word innovation all the time, because that is the innovation, which is the strategic objective. Agile is a means to that end.
Interesting concept. Interesting point for debate, I think. The challenge or the difference between innovation and agility. But sorry, Melanie.
I think what we find is that agility does have a sort of history that it's connected with something that IT do. And I think that therefore that's partly some of the reason why the language is not used, because people don't want to expose themselves as not necessarily knowing anything. I think we can widen out the conversation and get people on board with an agile culture that we talked about earlier, and wanting to be that more iterative, more open to change approach. If we hook it back to this is a way in which you get ideas underway faster, whether you're in the public or private sector. The private sector want to get the ideas out the door faster and have first to market advantage. A lot of the public sector are interested in gaining the efficiencies that new ways of working will give them. So they want to innovate and keep up with all the innovations that are going on around them. So I think innovation is what organizations are trying to achieve. And certainly nearly every CEO study around the world will put innovation as at least in the top 2 of the strategic objectives. Efficiency is the other one. So they vie for top scoring, if you like. But it's the agility piece and everything we're talking about in terms of how to be more agile that achieves that objective.
Interesting. I mean, Andrew, the concept of the Scrum team and the rituals, the procedures about using Scrum have a lot of sense when you're actually developing software because of that iterative process. Do Scrum teams fit within non-software development projects as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The One of the things that that we've sort of really recognised and embraced with the our latest project management offering, which is the Agile PM for Scrum, is that multiple teams of people with very different disciplines are likely to be involved in a change of any substance. And yeah, for sure, software teams may well be one of them. But all of the other sort of teams, maybe not even teams, but it's just individuals from time to time that need to be involved in making that change happen. Need sort of coordination, and so the notion that you may well have a a team building a product, you also need a team to market that product, and those are very different skills usually. A designing a product is very different to manufacturing one, which is very different to the supply chain stuff associated, setting up a supply chain to deliver it in volume, and all of those things. So the notion that that you can combine, or you should combine, these different focuses into the same overall change initiative makes sense. And if you're going to do that, then using a framework like Scrum, which is fantastic because it is so light, makes it applicable to everything. If you read the latest version of the Scrum Guide, Scrum Guide 2020, there is no mention of IT, there's no mention of software, there's no mention even obliquely of things like testing anymore. It is deliberately been engineered in the latest version to be generic and applicable to anybody who is Scrum Guide describes it as solving complex problems. Yeah, so in that sense, all the mechanics are there. Going to the point you made about the rituals, the rituals are or events, as they used to be called ceremonies, which gave that ritualistic feel. They've been renamed events now just to try and get away from them. We do them for ceremonial reasons. No, we do them because they have value, and the value that all of the events in Scrum are there to do is about empiricism. It's about making what you're doing transparent so that it can be inspected, and based on the inspection so that it can be improved. And whether that applies to the way of working or the product that you might be creating, or the change that you might be executing, that transparency is critical to allow you to be agile, actually, to adapt as you go in order to meet the overall objective of the business. So yeah, most definitely, Scrum fits in a non-software context, and very strongly in a project context as a way of pulling people together under the same sort of philosophy, language, ways of working.
So if we move on a little bit and look into the future, Melanie, there's a lot of stuff around AI at the moment. So what do you think is going to be the major impact of AI on people doing agile change management or innovative change management? How do you think AI will affect the team doing the work?
I think when it comes to affecting the business, the most common shift we can see already is that in using AI, we are automating more and more than perhaps we've ever been able to do, because it's artificial intelligence. So it isn't just streamlining existing processes and making them automatic, but actually it's enabling the platforms we use to learn and to keep learning so they can do more and more activities. That shifts how we use humans in any part of our knowledge economy. So I'm seeing teams now who are expected to, instead of enter data and to therefore be rewarded on the speed and accuracy to which they enter that data, they're now being expected to build their own insights from looking at that data and actually join the dots and make connections using their own logic, so that they have new ideas, they have things that they want to take forward in the business, so adding value to the customer. We're also seeing, by taking away a lot of that manual intervention, that they can spend more time in conversations with customers. So it's shifting people's roles to being much more of engaged with other human beings and creating ideas off the back of that. So that's, if you like, the downstream impact. The upstream impact is that a lot of the data is coming through APIs from other systems. So you might be the recipient of data that you are supposed to use to have insights, but you can see that it's wrong. So part of your role has become a coaching and a training role for your colleagues further upstream in the organization to point out why you need different information, or you need them to do things differently. So we're starting to see that teams are being affected in terms of how we use humans at work.
Very interesting. Andrew, one final question for you. I know within the consortium you have the Agile Research Network. Is the network throwing up any findings to do with artificial intelligence that you think might have an impact on, the world of the consortium, business agility?
That isn't one of the things that that the research is currently focused on, as far as I'm aware. The Agile Research Network is half funded by the consortium, and the other half is funded by academia and other sources. So it's possible that they've already jumped on that, and I just haven't I haven't caught up with that. One thing I will say though is it is going to have a profound change, make a profound change to everybody's lives. It's somehow, whether it is directly or not. And what was interesting, I've just started actually a course on an online course on, it's called prompt engineering, and that is about how you engineer the your correspondence with Chat GPT or a similar AI. And what's really interesting, what Mel said about coaching your colleagues and training your colleagues, is I'm starting to learn that you need to coach and train your AI partner as well in order to get the sort of information that you need. So you can actually, through your own judgment and shaping these things, you can leave the crackpots outside. We don't need to, if we're talking about astronomy, we don't need the Flat Earth Society's opinion on astronomy or whatever it might be. So we can actually train it to work with the sort of thing that's going to focus around the value that we want to deliver as an organisation. And I think that's going to be a really interesting dimension to this as well.
That's interesting. I mean, just a thought from me. The problem I have with the whole Chat GPT prompting and research is, if I know about a subject, I can see whether I believe it's right or whether I believe it's wrong. And therefore it actually does a lot of work for me and gives me a basis to work on. The problem is, if I'm looking for information I don't really understand, I've got no idea whether it's good or bad because it's not referenced to anything. Yeah. And so, you already hear some horror stories, don't you, in the press about people that have got that fundamentally wrong. So it's going to be fascinating to watch how that plays out over the next few years. So
I am a prompt engineer because I am the CEO of Capability for Change, and that is based on a generative AI product. So I've been teaching the AI system that I have all about change management and what the most common resistances to change are, and all the techniques that we can use for overcoming that resistance and creating behavior change. So I've been doing that job for about 18 months now.
Fascinating. Subject for another conversation, I'm sure, Mel.
Absolutely.
Melanie and Andrew, many thanks for your time. It's been fascinating talking to you both. As you say, I think there's probably lots of things we could have carried on talking about, but time flies. I know everyone has to go off and do other things. Many thanks for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.